Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at solution-focused therapy, or SFT for short. And we're going to try to answer a question that might seem a little counterintuitive at first. Can therapy really work if you only focus on solutions instead of problems? We're going to be exploring that question and so much more, using a university course handout as our guide. And to help us navigate this topic, I'm joined by an expert in therapeutic approaches. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to dive into this topic. SFT really does shake things up in the world of therapy.
Okay, so let's jump right into it. This handout tells us that SFT actually originated in family therapy. It was pioneered by therapists like Steve DeShazer, Insoo Kim Berg, and Bill O'Hanlon. What I found really interesting is that it's rooted in a competency-based model, which, if I'm understanding this correctly, means it zeroes in on what clients are already doing well, rather than dwelling on their struggles. Did I get that right?
You absolutely nailed it. Instead of getting bogged down in analyzing problems and digging through past traumas, SFT shines a spotlight on a client's strengths and past successes. The idea is to build on what's already working.
Okay, that's already a pretty big departure from what many people probably imagine when they think of therapy, but how does that actually work in practice?
Well, SFT operates on a few core principles, and they're all about flipping the script on traditional therapy. The first one that really stands out is the emphasis on building solutions, not just solving problems.
So instead of dissecting what's wrong, you're looking for what's right and figuring out how to amplify it. That's a really interesting way to look at things.
Exactly. It's about shifting the focus from what's broken to what's working. And another crucial principle is that SFT is intensely future-oriented. It's not about dwelling on past failures. It's about envisioning a brighter future.
So does that mean clients basically just ignore their problems and only focus on what they want their life to look like?
Not exactly. SFT recognizes that even when a problem feels all-consuming, there are always exceptions, times when the problem is less intense or doesn't even show up. By examining these exceptions, the client and therapist can uncover existing solutions and strategies that are already working, even if it's just in small ways.
Hold on, I have a question about that. The handout mentions this example of a therapist working with a client struggling with insomnia. The therapist asked the client, "Tell me about the times when you do manage to get a good night's sleep." And the client realized that on the nights they avoided screen time before bed, they slept much better. It seems so simple, but I guess that's the point, right? Finding those hidden gems of success.
That's a fantastic example, and you're right. It often boils down to uncovering those seemingly insignificant moments when things are going well. And that's one of the most intriguing aspects of SFT, the idea that even small changes can create a ripple effect, leading to significant shifts over time.
It's like that saying, sometimes the smallest step in the right direction ends up being the biggest step of your life. But how do you actually guide a client towards those small steps and help them build that momentum?
That's where the ingredients of SFT come into play. It all starts with a conversation, a genuine collaborative conversation between the client and therapist.
So it's not just the therapist dictating what the client needs to do.
Absolutely not. The conversation revolves around the client's concerns, their hopes for the future, and the strengths and resources they already have. It's a joint effort to make sense of their situation and chart a path forward. And to actually map that path, specific techniques come into play. This handout mentions a few key ones, like building a cooperative therapeutic alliance, setting measurable goals, and having future-oriented discussions. Would you like to unpack some of those?
Yes, definitely. I'm particularly curious about how SFT therapists actually help clients set measurable goals. It seems like that could be pretty tricky, especially when you're dealing with complex issues.
Well, one really interesting technique they use is called scaling. Have you ever heard of that?
It sounds familiar, but I'm not sure how it works in a therapy setting.
It's actually pretty simple. Clients are asked to rate their current situation on a scale, say, from 0 to 10, with 10 representing their ideal outcome or the miracle scenario. So, for example, if someone is struggling with anxiety, they might rate their current level of anxiety as a 7.
Okay, I see. So by using that scale, they can track their progress and see how far they've come. It's like having a visual representation of their journey, right?
Exactly. And it also helps break down those big, sometimes overwhelming goals into smaller, more manageable steps. For example, the client might aim to get to a 6 on the anxiety scale by next week, maybe by practicing some relaxation techniques that they and the therapist discuss. It's about creating a sense of agency and control.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm already starting to see how this approach could be so empowering for clients. It's not about dwelling on their shortcomings, but rather giving them the tools to build on their strengths and create real, tangible change.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's another fascinating technique called reframing, but we can delve into that after a quick break.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. Don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into solution-focused therapy. Welcome back. Before the break, we were just about to uncover this technique called reframing. It sounds like it has the potential to be a real game changer.
It absolutely can be. Reframing is about helping the client view the problem through a different lens, shifting their perspective to a more empowering angle. It's not about denying that the problem exists, but rather finding a way to see it in a new light.
So how does that actually play out in a therapy session? Could you give me an example? Let's say someone comes in feeling stuck in a dead-end job. How might a therapist use reframing in that situation?
That's a great example. Instead of letting the client get bogged down in the negatives of their current job, the therapist might encourage them to view it as a stepping stone. They might ask, what are you learning in this job that could be valuable in your dream career? Or what skills are you developing that you can take with you?
Okay, that makes sense. It's about finding the silver lining even in a situation that feels pretty bleak.
Precisely. And it's not about sugarcoating things or pretending the problem doesn't exist. It's about helping the client shift their focus to what they can control and how they can use their current situation to move towards their goals.
You know, it's funny, this whole idea of reframing reminds me of something I read in the handout about the neurological basis for why focusing on solutions can be more effective than dwelling on problems. It mentioned that when we focus on negative thoughts and emotions, our brains actually get stuck in a loop, making it harder to see possibilities and solutions.
That's a great point. There's actually a growing body of research that supports that idea. Studies have shown that when we focus on positive emotions and solutions, it activates different parts of our brain, leading to increased creativity, problem-solving abilities, and even improved physical health.
Wow, I had no idea there was scientific evidence to back that up. So it's not just a feel-good philosophy, it's actually rooted in how our brains work.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes SFT so compelling. It combines practical techniques with a solid understanding of human psychology and neuroscience.
This is also fascinating, but I'm also wondering how adaptable SFT is. Does it work for a wide range of issues, or is it more suited to specific types of problems? Because I know you mentioned earlier that it originated in family therapy, but this handout also talks about its use in individual therapy.
That's a great question. And you're right. SFT isn't limited to just family therapy. One of its biggest strengths is its versatility. It's been used effectively to address a wide range of issues, from anxiety and depression to relationship problems, work-related stress, and even substance abuse.
Wait, really? Substance abuse? I have to admit, I always thought of SFT as being a bit too optimistic or light touch to address something as serious as addiction.
I understand where you're coming from. There's sometimes a misconception that SFT is all about positive thinking and ignoring the hard stuff. But that's not the case at all. SFT acknowledges the reality of the problem, but it doesn't dwell on it. Instead, it shifts the focus to the client's strengths and resources, helping them tap into their own capacity for change.
So in the case of substance abuse, it wouldn't be about denying the addiction, but rather helping the individual identify their motivations for wanting to change and the steps they can take to achieve sobriety.
Exactly. It's about empowering them to take ownership of their recovery. And one of the key principles of SFT that really shines through in this context is that it's a client-centered approach. It recognizes that every individual is unique and that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
So it's not about the therapist dictating what the client needs to do, but rather guiding them to discover their own path forward. I'm starting to see how that could be incredibly powerful, especially for someone who's struggling with addiction and might feel like they've lost control of their life.
Absolutely. It's about helping them reclaim that sense of agency and empowering them to make choices that support their recovery.
You know, this all sounds really promising, but I'm curious. Are there any situations where SFT might not be the best approach?
That's a really important question, and it's something the handout touches on as well. While SFT has been shown to be effective for a wide range of issues, it's essential to acknowledge that it's not a cure-all. There are certain situations where it might not be the most appropriate approach, such as cases involving severe mental health disorders, or individuals who require immediate crisis intervention.
So it's about being realistic about the limitations of any single therapy approach, and recognizing that some individuals might need additional support beyond what SFT alone can provide.
Exactly. It's crucial for therapists to be aware of those limitations. and to make appropriate referrals when necessary. And even in cases where SFT is a good fit, it often works best when combined with other therapeutic approaches.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not about SFT versus other therapies, but rather finding the right combination of tools and techniques to meet the unique needs of each client.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that there's no one right way to do therapy and being open to different perspectives and approaches.
This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to the power and potential of solution-focused therapy. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of what therapy can be.
Me too. It's such a refreshing and empowering approach.
And I love how it shifts the focus from what's wrong with me to what's possible for me. That's a message I think we can all benefit from hearing.
Absolutely. It reminds us that we all have the power to create positive change in our lives, even in the face of challenges.
Well, on that inspiring note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into solution-focused therapy.
It has been a pleasure joining you on this journey.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive. Remember, the power to create a brighter future lies within each of us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep. All right, we're back and ready to step inside an SFT session. I have to admit, I'm really curious to see how all these principles and techniques we've been talking about actually translate into a real-world therapy setting.
Well, imagine walking into a therapist's office, but instead of that stereotypical image of a dimly lit room with a therapist scribbling notes behind a giant leather chair, you're met with a warm, inviting space. That's the first thing that sets an SFT session apart. It's all about creating a comfortable and collaborative atmosphere.
That makes sense. It seems like it would be hard to focus on solutions if you're feeling anxious or intimidated by the environment itself.
Exactly. And the therapist's demeanor will reflect that same welcoming energy. They'll start by actively listening to the client's concerns, not just with their ears, but with their entire body language. They'll be making eye contact, nodding, and really tuning into what the client is saying, both verbally and nonverbally.
So it's not just about collecting information, but about building rapport and a sense of trust from the get-go.
You got it. The therapist might start by asking open-ended questions like, what brings you here today? Or, what would you like to see different in your life? Notice how those questions are phrased. They're already subtly directing the client's focus towards solutions and desired outcomes.
I see what you mean. It's not about dwelling on the problem, but about identifying the goal, the destination they want to reach.
Right. And once they have a better understanding of the client's goals, they might start gently introducing the core principles of SFT, explaining how this approach differs from traditional therapy.
Would they actually use the term solution-focused therapy? Or would they describe it in a more everyday language?
They might use the term, but they definitely explain it in a way that makes sense to the client, using metaphors or analogies if needed. The important thing is that the client understands the framework and feels comfortable with the process.
So there's a real emphasis on transparency and making sure the client feels like an active participant in their own therapy.
Absolutely. And then once that foundation is laid, they might start exploring those exceptions we talked about earlier. They might ask things like, tell me about a time when you felt less anxious. Or when was the last time you were able to handle this situation effectively?
It's like they're playing detective, looking for clues to the client's own inner resilience.
That's a great way to put it. And by uncovering those moments when the problem is less intense or absent, they're helping the client recognize that they already possess some of the tools they need to create change. It's about shifting the focus from I can't to I have and I can again.
That's so powerful. It's like reminding them of their own strength and reminding them that they're not defined by their problems, but what happens next? How do they go from identifying those exceptions to actually building solutions?
That's where those techniques like the miracle question and scaling come into play. They might say something like, imagine you wake up tomorrow and this problem has magically disappeared. What would be the first thing you notice differently?
But they actually asked that. I thought the miracle question was more of a theoretical concept.
Nope. They often use it verbatim. It might sound a bit cheesy at first, but it's incredibly effective at helping clients tap into their deepest desires and envision a future without the problem holding them back. And once they have that vision, scaling helps break it down into achievable steps.
So it's like they're creating a roadmap to their ideal destination with clear milestones along the way. And by tracking their progress on that scale, they can see that they're moving in the right direction, even if it's just one small step at a time.
Exactly. And throughout the session, the therapist will be looking for opportunities to reframe the client's perspective, using those empowering questions and highlighting their strengths and resources.
I imagine there's a lot of positive reinforcement happening as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
The therapist will be constantly acknowledging the client's efforts and celebrating their successes no matter how small they might seem. It's all about creating a positive feedback loop that reinforces those positive behaviors and helps build momentum for lasting change.
One thing that really stands out to me about this whole approach is that it seems incredibly respectful of the client's autonomy. It's not about the therapist dictating answers, but rather guiding the client to discover their own path forward.
That's one of those beautiful aspects of SFT. It honors the client's inherent wisdom and capacity for growth, recognizing that they are the experts in their own lives.
This has been such an eye-opening exploration of solution-focused therapy. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of what therapy can be.
Me too. It's such a refreshing and empowering approach.
And I love how it shifts the focus from what's wrong with me to what's possible for me.
Mhm.
That's a message I think we can all benefit from hearing.
Absolutely. It reminds us that we all have the power to create positive change in our lives, even in the face of challenges.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into solution-focused therapy. And a special thanks to our expert for sharing their insights with us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.